All right. Welcome everyone to our Springs in the Desert discussion this evening. We intended for this to be a live event, but unfortunately, for some reason, Facebook was just not cooperating with our desire tonight. So we are going to be having our discussion anyway, and we're hoping this can be a discussion maybe later on through our Facebook group. And y'all can be commenting as you listen to this podcast episode. So we're sorry about the lack of live event, but please still feel free to discuss this in our group and as a comment if you would like. Tonight, as we mentioned in our promotions, we are going to be discussing self-care and infertility. And we're excited to have three female hostesses and one husband with us tonight. And myself, I am just going to be kind of moderating and adding in some questions that we've received prior to this from some of our Facebook group members. So we've discussed in the past in different live events and podcast episodes that we all come from like different perspectives on infertility. We're all in different points in our journey. Some of us have been married for a shorter period of time, longer period of time, you know, different places on this journey, but there's a lot that we share in common. And one of those things is the need for self-care. So we're going to be discussing what that is, what it looks like, and how we can have some best practices to carry it on, especially during the difficulties of infertility. So we're blessed to have several team members with us tonight. We have Anne, Cayce, Stacey, and Phil. I just realized Cayce and Stacey rhyme. That's pretty awesome.
That could be like a group. Could we go on the road and do something what we would do? But that sounds like a great name for, I don't know, a touring act of some sort. I don't know. We'll have to think about that.
Yeah, I agree. So, Anne, as y'all know, is the co-founder of Springs in the Desert. She has a background and master's degree in theology, and she's currently an instructor online with St. Joseph's College. I said that correctly? Good. And of course, she does a lot of things around here with Springs in the Desert. And one of these, we're blessed to have her tonight with this discussion. Cayce, we're excited that she's here tonight. She is a mental health counselor, so she's going to bring that experience to this discussion, which is a great blessing. And she and her husband, Brian, are actively involved in their parish. They do a number of different ministries. They're really involved in music, engaged couple mentoring, and they also run a ministry for miscarriage bereavement. Stacey and Phil are with us, and Stacey, congratulations, recently graduated with her master's degree in theology this summer. Pretty excited for her, and she's a youth and young adult ministry coordinator in her diocese in Indiana. And her husband Phil is an IT manager, and they volunteer together actually to work with youth at their parish. And I hear that Phil also really likes Frisbee golf. Did I get that right? Frisbee
That's
golf?
pretty close. We'll go with it.
Okay, Frisbee golf.
There was an adamant instruction that should be mentioned. So clearly that is a form of self-care.
There you go. I think it's actually preferred as disc golf.
Oh, my bad.
We'll leave it at that.
You guys can argue about that later.
Yes, we'll get into all that. So yeah, all of these wonderful people are part of our Springs in the Desert team. So we're so excited to have them gathered here tonight to discuss this very important topic. And to start us off, Anne is going to lead us in a prayer.
Yeah, today is September 14th as we're recording, and it is the feast of the exaltation of the cross. And as we were supposed to do a Facebook Live event, and we had technical difficulties, we see now why we need the cross, because in a fallen world, technology doesn't cooperate when you need it to. So anyway, among other things, right? So in all seriousness, this is an important feast day. And I think especially so for those of us who carry this particular burden of infertility. So I'm going to pray this actually a hymn that we would sing in the Eastern Church on this feast. I'm not going to sing it. I'm just going to speak it. So if we could just take a moment to come in the presence of the Lord together. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, O people, let us contemplate the marvelous wonder. Let us bow before the power of the cross. For the tree of paradise gave rise to the reign of death, and now a tree has made our life blossom forth when the sinless Savior was nailed upon it. And now, all the nations that are nourished by this incorruptible food sings praises. You destroyed death by your cross and set us free. O Lord, glory to you. Gentle Jesus, by your suffering and death on the cross, we are saved. Unite our crosses of infertility and loss to yours. Bear our crosses with us, turning our suffering into a sign of contradiction and a witness to the world to your faithfulness, your enduring love, and your great mercy. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Allie, I think you're muted right now.
Thank you.
Yep.
You cut that out.
You are
Okay.
at the moment of silence.
So I think it's really good before we get started to define terms. And since we're blessed to have Cayce with us tonight, I thought we could just start out with asking her to just give us an idea, what is self-care? I think sometimes we can have some preconceived notions. We mentioned in our promotion that, you know, it's more than just a manicure and pedicure. So what is self-care and why is it important, Cayce?
Okay, so a definition of self-care is meeting our needs through regular, deliberate actions that we take to care for our physical, emotional, and mental well-being. So I'll give a little list of what self-care is and what self-care is not. I'm going to start with the nots because I think we tend to have a lot of misconceptions about self-care. So self-care is not selfish. It is not mindless. It's not extravagant. It's not competitive. It's not occasional, and it's also not optional. So that leaves us with what self-care is. It's self-preserving. It's mindful. It's sustainable. It's compassionate, it's daily, and it's necessary. So I think that those lists already kind of blow out of the water the idea that a mani-pedi encapsulates self-care, and it certainly doesn't for the gents. So in terms of thinking about self-care, it's not just a buzzword, it's not just a luxury experience. It's not something that we're too busy for. It's actually something that should be a priority. It's going to sustain us to be able to attend to different relationships and responsibilities that we might have. So self-care is just as unique as we are as individuals. And we'll get more into some of the details and examples of how some of our team members practice self-care. But overall, self-care should be a series of things that we do each and every day. It could be as simple as taking time to breathe, drinking enough water, making sure to put healthy foods in our bodies, setting aside time for prayer. It doesn't have to be something that can only happen every once in a while, like a spa treatment or a vacation. Those things can certainly be included in self-care, but we can't rely on those things only. It has to be something that we engage with daily.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so helpful to just lay that groundwork. I want to get into, like what you said, that kind of some strategies, practical strategies that have worked for each of us as we, especially in the area of infertility. But first, I thought it actually might be interesting to talk about maybe some of what we did wrong at the beginning. I know, Anne, your story related to this, and kind of how the need for self-care, like that awareness that we need to be mindful of this, developed through our journey with infertility. So Anne, I wanted to kick it over to you because I know that was something that you particularly talked about.
Yeah, that's for sure. And Cayce, I really appreciate how you've broadened that understanding of self-care, because I don't know about you or our listeners, but I mean, sometimes when we hear things that are sort of like buzzwords, right? You know, it's kind of like self-care, you know, it sounds selfish or it sounds silly. So, you know, I think it is really important to kind of broaden our understanding of what that means and to remind us that it's, you know, it's not something that is selfish or it's, you know, and it's definitely not something that's optional. I wish that I would have had that definition and that I would have known that when we were actively trying to conceive. So, you know, on our team, I'm the oldest person on the team, and we are in a situation where, you know, we're no longer trying to conceive. We have, you know, passed the point where, I mean, short of a miracle, where conception is really even possible. So it's only kind of in hindsight that I've been coming to understand the importance of self-care. And one of the words that you mentioned too, Cayce, was mindful, being mindful. And I think that when we were in the midst of trying to conceive, and especially when we were going through different treatments, I was not even in a way mindful of what I was doing in those treatments, much less what I needed to do to kind of take care of my mental and my spiritual health, you know, while I was going through it. So I think one of the most important aspects for me that I've come to realize is that intentionality and mindfulness around self-care. I was thinking about that earlier today, like all of the things that you're doing to optimize your fertility, right? And you're, you know, perhaps on certain diets or, you know, doing things to try to optimize your health, which is all really good. But when I look back on it, I was so focused on that, like, let me eat bee pollen or, you know, take whatever supplement or, you know, whatever it might be, toward the goal of conception, not so much like, okay, like my own health and my own body and how this is really good for me. It's not just about achieving this particular goal. I really wasn't taking into consideration what all of this meant for me, for my body, for my, you know, for my spiritual health, for my mental health, and for my relationship with my husband. So, I guess, you know, in some ways I'm sort of like an example of like anti-self-care, you know, the opposite of self-care, or how you can really miss, you know, those opportunities to take care of yourself in an intentional way. I don't know if that resonates with anybody else, probably at least with some people listening, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that it's easy when you're looking at the goal to just like to ignore kind of like your own personal needs, because you're like, but it's for the sake of like this good. And so I can like put myself aside, almost in like a way that's like sacrificing, which sacrifice is good. But sometimes you lose yourself, not by like intentionally laying ourselves down, but just by like forgetting the Father's love for you, and you're so focused in on that goal that you like you would do anything, right, to achieve that end. And then you yourself just become sort of like an object in sort of like an experiment,
Right.
instead of like an actual person.
Yeah, and then it sort of becomes not so much about being healthy as being just like, I have to make my body and my mind be in a certain way in order for this goal to be achieved. And you're right, Stacey, it's like you kind of get abstracted from yourself. It's like you're outside of yourself looking, you know, at this body and how it's functioning. So yeah.
Yeah, and as you were describing your own experience, and you said you were like the example of anti-self-care. I mean, I think we all are to some degree. And that's why it's really important that self-care is compassionate Because if we get on the competition train of, well, this person's really good about their self-care and I'm not, I mean, that's not caring for yourself either. And so I would have to say, even as a mental health practitioner, I really struggle with self-care. I don't think I would have been as mindful of it had I not been in the field I'm in, because it's an ethical obligation for counselors to practice self-care. So that's like pretty big stakes. But I learned a lot that our culture doesn't teach us. Self-care, even though it's a buzzword, is pretty countercultural. It means really tuning in to what you need. It means setting aside what the culture says you need sometimes, and it can be really challenging.
Yeah, that's so good to just hear those words, because I think it kind of helps us, focus on what really is important even in this conversation, and kind of really ask ourselves some questions like, well, how am I doing in this area? So to kind of get practical about it, I know prior to this, Cayce, you mentioned there are some practical ways that we can establish self-care routines that are sustainable and will work for us. But I wanted to ask all of you to comment on that, and especially given, I know we've all experienced infertility, particularly times where infertility treatment is intensive. And for some people that lasts for a short amount of time. For some people it may last years, off and on, and sometimes, taking breaks in between. So how can we develop sustainable self-care especially during those very trying times where, we have to be driving to appointments, charting our cycles, thinking about vitamin, all of the things that go along that demand so much of our time and our emotion?
We have, for the past few months, been on a period of like taking a break, and we're sort of like reevaluating what it will look like when we like decide that we want to move back in the direction of like treatments and all those things. But this is sort of like, I mean, part of the reason we needed to take a break was because of self-care. But like, it's sort of like being able to take this time to examine like, how can I like take care of myself? How can we take care of ourselves in a more well-rounded way as we like look towards the possibility of treatments again? One thing specifically though that we've decided is that I won't go to any like doctor's appointments by myself, because it's infertility is already so isolating that it's it's so hard. And going into it, like the initially, like the years of things that we've done, like I think you're just naive to like what you're going to be going through, and processing it emotionally. I think having somebody accompany you to appointments can be so helpful, because it can pull you out of that isolation that you're already going through with infertility. So that's one of the things that we've been discussing, is like, if and when we decide to make a switch, that like being able to, I suppose, like be in relationship at those appointments and after those appointments when you're trying to like piece things together, is so important. Another thing, and I don't want to like steal all of the things, but another thing that's so very important is, for me, is regarding like mental health. And thankfully I was struggling actually before our diagnosis of infertility, and I pursued counseling on my own early on in our marriage. And I know 100% that I wouldn't be able to like handle all of these things if I hadn't like found that healing. And so like a huge part of self-care for me is counseling, and like staying in touch. I'm not like actively going right now, but like I do stay in touch from time to time with my counselor, and like taking care of mental health is been so important for our journey with infertility.
Yeah, and Stacey, just, I mean, that being able to take a break, or when you get to that point of discernment where you stop treatment, I think that's part of self-care too. Like, and especially, you know, like for us, I mean, we got married later in life. And so already it felt like the clock was, you know, looming large over us. So you can get into this sort of like race, like, no, we must plow through, we must keep going. And I can look back, you know, again, and see not only the stresses that I put on myself, but also on my marriage. And so I think that if to take a break is not selfish, and I think that is part of taking care of yourself. And it's okay for you to, you know, really think about it, pray about it, talk to your spouse about it, and, you know, to take that step back and not feel guilty about it.
And like not feel guilty, and like when people make the comments they're gonna make when they are like, why aren't you doing anything, you know, to just put those comments in their place, and which is not in your head, is far away, throw them out, is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that self-care is definitely on those big issues, like, are we going to, you know, try for this month? Are we going to take a break? And then I've also found a lot of comfort and consolation in doing self-care on the small levels, like the things that we might forget about. So for example, in terms of the infertility treatment that we've been doing, throughout it, I've been asked to take a variety of supplements, medications, all kinds of things, and I hate swallowing pills. And so there were some times when I would be, you know, my regimen would be like 10 pills in a day. And so I would just get myself so psyched out that even the idea of taking pills, I would like be thinking about it all day and like choke on one while I was trying to take it because I was all upset about it. And so to just, even with something as simple as that, to slow down, to take a moment, to take 5 deep breaths before I had to swallow any of the pills, so that my body was in a state of relaxation so that I could do what I needed to do. And then for me, having just like a really small reward system was helpful. I bought like some local chocolates and I let myself have one whenever I did like my pill regimen for the day. And so something just like that was able to help give me enough solace to do what I was being asked to do for treatment, and to really check in with myself about how I was. And so part of my self-care with treatment has been, you know, sometimes taking a month or a cycle off from like taking a certain vitamin that, like, while it's important, isn't essential to my health or my baby's health if I were to get pregnant. But just like to be able to knock off 1 or 2 pills from that daily regimen. So it can be those big items, but also the small ones that they just kind of stack on top of each other over time.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you might have something on that same topic, but I was going to also mention limiting time. Oh, so one thing that came up in the discussions on Facebook was comparison with other people. And I think everyone can relate to this, but whether it's on social media and the pregnancy announcements, or, you know, going to a gender reveal party or whatever at a baby shower, is things that we get invited to, and how at certain points, like, we may be more open. I know at certain points for me, it's been easier to attend things like that for whatever reason. And then at other times it's like more difficult. So part of, I think, my self-care has been setting boundaries on those things. And also it depends on the event. Like, I still haven't gone to a baby shower, but, you know, for some reason, like little kids' birthday parties or things like that are pretty easy for me to do, and I can really enjoy it. And so I don't know if that'll change. Like, I think it's also something I'm evaluating, you know, continually, like maybe in a year or 2 years, like a baby shower, depending on how I'm doing, will be okay. So maybe y'all can relate to that specifically with comparison. Like, how do we practice self-care when it comes to, you know, a friend who maybe is obtaining something that we wish we had? You know, maybe they prayed a novena and their prayer got answered and ours didn't. Like, how do we practice self-care in those situations?
Allie, I just want to mention that I liked what you just said there about evaluating. Like, I think it's important, whether it's self-care or, you know, any other aspects of our mental health or how we're dealing with treatments or whatever, is to, you know, continue to kind of check in, as you said, Cayce, check in with ourselves and just kind of see, okay, you know, where am I? And it's okay if I can't make the baby shower, but, you know, I'm going to the little kid parties or to the baptism or, you know, whatever. I think for me, at least, yes, creating boundaries is important. But when we were really in the hardest parts of treatment and the most difficult parts of the frustration and the grief, that I didn't so much create boundaries as I created walls. And so, you know, again, looking back, I can see those places where I really, instead of not just checking in with myself to see how I was, but instead of like checking in with the other people, with my friends, with people in my family, when, you know, there was a situation like that came up that was going to be difficult for me, I just kind of walled myself off. And so I think boundaries are good. Building walls around yourself, I think, is not taking care of yourself. It's kind of compounding, at least for me, it's compounding that, you know, that sadness and resentment. And, you know, I was kind of walling all of those emotions, you know, into myself. You know, I was kind of holding them closer.
Mm-hmm. And when you mentioned that, I think that at the beginning you had said how helpful it is to have a definition of self-care. And I think that if we're able to define something like boundaries as well, that can be so helpful. I like to think of boundaries as a cell membrane, that it doesn't mean that everything stays out and that everything that was in stays in. It means that it is semi-permeable, but that there is a pretty sophisticated system in terms of what's allowed in, what's absolutely not allowed in, and then when and how are the other things allowed in. And so that can be really helpful for us to connect to that mindfulness that we need in terms of our self-care. That if we notice, okay, maybe like social media is in general not healthy for my self-care, but maybe I'm okay on social media except on Mother's Day or other days that might be especially triggering for me. That might be like a hard stop boundary on that day, but it might be more permeable on another day. And so just being reflective and mindful of ourselves and our needs in that way can be really helpful in terms of evaluating whether we've made a healthy boundary or whether we've created a wall.
I think also recognizing that the sting that you feel when something like good happens to somebody you wish would happen to you, that is okay, but it doesn't have to fuel like jealousy. But it's like you can still be happy for your friend or for your family member for their positive pregnancy test, even though you feel this sting or this, like, you know, like lump in your throat. And it's like those feelings are both true and both valid, that you can have joy despite like the sadness for yourself. And just to recognize that, like I was just reading this, somebody sharing the other day about how they hated themselves because of that feeling that they got when they saw a pregnancy announcement or for like a close friend. But the reality is it's not as though like we can't hate ourselves for that sadness and that grief and that emotion that we feel. Just recognize it as that, like, this is grief, this is sadness that I'm feeling, even though I still have joy for my friend. It doesn't mean that I hate them. It doesn't mean that I'm like so consumed in jealousy or that I like can't be happy for them. You can both be happy for them despite the fact that you might feel sad for yourself at the same time. And so those aren't like those emotions can both be experienced at the same time. So I guess sort of deciphering what it is you're feeling versus just saying, oh my gosh, I'm so filled with jealousy, when in reality it might just be like your own grief, not jealousy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Stacey, I so agree with you. And I think this is one place where, particularly for me in my self-care, that my faith is a real source of strength, because when I am tempted to get down on myself for some of the feelings that I'm having, if I can remind myself that I'm made in God's image, and so that if I care for and love God, one of my obligations is to care for and love myself. Not to put myself ahead of people at all times or be selfish, but there isn't any kind of problem with truly deeply caring for yourself. We're told in the Gospels so many times to love your neighbor, you love yourself. And I think that a lot of the time we can focus on the love of the neighbor, which is great, but kind of like have the love of self part as an afterthought. But chances are most of us tend to treat other people in our lives better than we treat ourselves a lot of the time. And so if we could really care for ourselves in the same way that we might care for our spouse when they're hurting, or care for a dear friend, we are probably going to end up taking better care of ourselves if we really have that command to love our neighbor as we love ourselves in our mind.
Yeah, and I mean, if we love ourselves the way that God loves, I mean, it won't be selfish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beautiful. You mentioned spouses, so I want to make sure that we include the the gentleman that we have with us, Phil. But just a general question. I know that it was brought up in the Facebook discussion. You know, husbands and wives, as we've mentioned in many of these podcast episodes, grieve and feel infertility very differently. But when it comes to self-care, I think it's equally important to acknowledge that we have different needs, just as every individual has different needs in terms of how they care for themselves through infertility. So just to open it up for anyone, but Phil, you're welcome to chime in. Like, how does it look different for husbands and wives, and how can we encourage our spouse to care for themselves in the way that they need to?
I think it's important to remind Stacey, first off, that she's a child of God, and that she's loved by God. But then also, like, inviting her, when I am doing something on my own, inviting her to join me, instead of like, you know, like, hey, I'm going to hang out with friends, be like, hey, do you want to come with me? But then also encouraging her to, like, you know, hey, you should, you know, go get your hair done today. Or, you know, Stacey loves shopping like most women. Like, hey, maybe go buy yourself, you know, a new piece of clothing or 5. You know, just trying to remind her that, you know, she doesn't have to feel like she's being selfish when she, you know, spends time on herself. But then also, like, I feel like the self-care can also reflect back on me, as trying to, like, men always want to be like the hero, and like reminding myself that, like, you know, I don't always have to be the hero, and I always don't have to, like, you know, be this big strong man that shows no emotion. Like, it's important for me to, like, show my emotion to my wife of things that I'm going through. And I think kind of the same concept as Anne was saying of putting walls up to, like, other people. I feel like men can sometimes put their walls up to their wives of, like, you know, I'm not going to show any emotion. But that's like the opposite of self-care, is, you know, not letting things out.
I also, to add on to what you're saying, think that you've helped me to recognize, like, the voices and the opinions and the thoughts of people that do matter and the ones that don't, and sort of to, like, shed the voices that shouldn't bear any weight on our infertility journey. I went to a infertility support group, which is, they meet, like, they're 2 hours away from us, so I don't go all the time, but a woman there shared about how she and her husband created this like 3-tiered level of like privilege for people like to discuss their infertility with, and they would like number people based off of like, this is somebody we share everything with, this is somebody that we share a medium amount with, and this is somebody that we share nothing with, because they're not like they're not necessarily like in tune to our emotions and our feelings and the reality of what we're going through. And she said that that was just like a really good bonding experience for her and her husband, because they would discuss like, okay, so and so who came up at church and asked like, so why haven't you had any kids yet? Like at what level are they at, right? And so I think just like us, like we haven't necessarily numbered people, but we have this sort of dialogue about, okay, this is what somebody said to me, like, is it do we just like kind of shut it, ignore it, like this isn't something I'm gonna let into my heart, or is it something like that we need to like consider? Phil's been really good about that. And then also helping to surround us with like people that do care and support us, and like with whatever we're going through. He has some really awesome friends that are now my friends, that have just really been willing to accompany us and care for us on our journey.
Yeah, something that had occurred to me as I was thinking about this was, I think it might have been the last episode of Book Club, when you were all talking about The Secret Diary of Elizabeth Lasser. And I think, Stacey, you had brought up the love languages, the 5 love languages. And it occurred to me that there is some kind of correspondence with self-care and like sort of learning how we can best take care of ourselves, and also how our spouses not only take care of us, but take care of themselves as well, and like understanding and respecting that. So for example, for me, I know that when Keith is like outside for hours and he's trimming and mowing and landscaping and going to Lowe's at 6 a.m. and, you know, buying mums and that sort of thing, like I know that that's a way that he takes care of himself. That's a way that he kind of decompresses. And, you know, at first it was like, why is he doing that? Or why is he always outside? Or does he not want to spend time with me? Of course, you know, I would never ask him, right? I would never just say like, ask him, right? I just create all the scenarios in my head. But so you come to learn how your spouse needs to be cared for, how we cared for them, but also what they need to kind of do themselves to, you know, to take care of themselves. I love, Phil, how you sort of focused everything on Stacey and how you make sure that, you know, she's being cared for and supportive. But I'm curious as to yourself and how do you take care of yourself? And I think that this is important, because when you say self-care, I think immediately you have men say like, oh, that's, you know, that's like the woman thing, you know, but it's just as important for our spouses, you know, to really kind of take care of themselves and do some of the evaluating we're talking about, not exactly the way that we do as women, but you know, you all need that sort of time and self-awareness and evaluation. So I don't know, do you have any secrets you can let us in on that we can talk over with our spouses? Or
so kind of going back to the love languages, I think the love language that I think my love language is quality time, and so I like to, like, when we go hang out, to like actually go do something. Like, it's sometimes I get kind of caught up in like, you know, wanting to always do things and quality time and stuff like that. But that's also important to like take care of myself. I like to go hang out with friends. I have like a small commute in the morning. It's really nice just to, you know, 20 minutes each way just to, you know, clear my mind and get ready for the day. I don't know.
What do you do though that's just you taking care of yourself?
Of myself?
Yes.
I take a shower every day.
No.
No.
That's self-care. It is.
Well, it is, but there's more. He just can't articulate. Okay, you play disc golf like 5 nights a week.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's self-care. It's just like quality time with myself.
Yes.
Um,
Or with his friends. He does it either by himself or with his friends. And that's part of his love language is quality time. It's not just with me, but it's with his friends and whoever he's with.
yeah, I would say that.
Disc golf is a huge, well, for a while it was Spartan races.
But then we didn't.
But then they all got canceled because of COVID. So that's why the new thing is disc golf.
Yeah.
But I called it frisbee golf earlier. And
No.
sometimes I go with him.
Yeah, but I don't know.
And that's a big part. And
I kind of just live life like I'm free.
he okay, so there's 5 love languages. We added a 6th one, which is Phil spending time by himself. That's the way that I can love Phil, is giving him. So he loves quality time with me, but he also, part of that quality time is quality time to do like whatever on his own, like frisbee golf, or like this summer he fixed up a few bikes, or just to do something on his own accord. That's, I think, the way would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, and I mean, so I didn't bring that up, Phil, to put you on the spot, but to say that I think it is important for men, for our spouses, to also take this idea of self-care seriously, because they are so focused on us and taking care of us. And like you said, Phil, on like being the hero. And so I just feel like it's important for us as women to really recognize that they need that self-care, whatever that means for them, whether it's, not frisbee golf, whatever is called, golf, or gardening, or, just having a little bit of time away, or working on cars, whatever it might be. I think, it's important for us to allow them that time as well, because they need it just as much as we do.
And how humble, Stacey, to like acknowledge that it can't come from you. Like I feel this way too with my husband. It's like, well, I can't, like he can just go off and like he wants to go on a bike ride a lot of the time and just like go do his thing. And I don't know, just to acknowledge like, yeah, I can't give him everything that he needs. Like he needs time on his own. He needs time with his friends, like with his brothers, whatever it is. So I think that's a really beautiful gift that we can give to our spouses, is like acknowledging that, we can't always provide everything that they need. So
yeah, when his friends are all in town, like I know that a big chunk of our weekend is he's going to be hanging out with them, or we'll all be hanging out together.
It's so nice to hear like a lot of good teamwork between spouses when it comes to self-care, because I would say that for my husband and me, that is really, really important. And so I think that we as spouses can be both encouragers and accountability partners for each other. And even like a trusted friend can be an encourager and an accountability partner. But with our spouses, we can do that in a unique way that no one else in our life is going to do that. And so like for my husband and me, we both know what are the traps we fall into, that like things that masquerade as self-care but really aren't, and we're able to lovingly call each other out on some of those things. Like for me, it's like, just letting that Netflix reel keep going and going. That for me is a mindless behavior, and it doesn't fill me back up. I kind of vegetate, but that's really it. And for my husband, he oftentimes says that one of his traps for self-care is like being on Twitter, or like eating foods that are comforting, but not being moderate about it. So we're able to, really just help each other in that way. And then also encourage each other to engage in that good self-care, like a lot of you were talking about this evening. And so I really hope that, I'm guessing it's probably mostly ladies who are going to be listening to this podcast, but like, please share this with your husbands, because I guarantee that if some of us here have had the misconception that self-care means a mani-pedi. I mean, for the most part, that excludes guys. I don't know very many guys who go for mani-pedis. And so if that's what the vision is of self-care, many men don't think it's for them. They think it's a girl thing. And self-care is an everybody thing. So be that good teammate to your spouse and share with them the good news of taking care of yourself.
Yeah, and especially so important, as we've been saying, when we're carrying that cross of infertility, and when we're in the midst of treatment, which can be so stressful and difficult in so many ways. And then, you know, in the aftermath, when we have decided to stop treatment, or, you know, we're just sort of now looking at each other and feeling like, now what? You know, we need to be able to, you know, to support each other in not just caring for each other, but caring for ourselves and encouraging each other to, you know, to care for ourselves. Because you're right, Cayce, when we take care of ourselves, we can better love and attend to the people that we love.
Well, that is a beautiful way to conclude. I was going to open it up for any last words, but I think well, do you all have any last takeaways, I guess, to wrap up our conversation beyond what you've already said?
If you don't mind, Allie, I would just give a few quick thoughts about getting yourself started with making a self-care routine, because we've been talking about a lot of great ideas tonight, and I hope they have resonated with a lot of you. But I would say start out from a place of self-reflection. Ask yourself, what centers me? What refuels me? What makes me suffer when I go without it is sometimes a good question to ask too. And then it's a good indication that all those things should be part of self-care for you. And then look at it on a daily level, a weekly level, a monthly level, a yearly level, and think, how can I incorporate parts of self-care at each of these levels? And then ask the people around you too, who you trust, to give good feedback. You know, ask them, when am I happiest? What am I doing? What do I get excited about? And sometimes the people we trust can give us really good insight into our self-care as well. And then, like we were saying, I would really encourage you to find someone to help keep you accountable, who's also going to encourage you. That person's not to be a taskmaster. Remember, it's not competitive, but someone who's really going to encourage you along the way. It might be your spouse, it might be a friend of yours, it might be your priest. It could really be anybody who's trustworthy.
And I would just add that I think another important part of self-care that, you know, we're running short on time now, but something for us all to really think about is that spiritual aspect of self-care. It's our body and our emotions, but it's also our souls. And so, you know, prayer, having a routine of prayer has really changed me and my outlook and my relationship with my husband. And when I'm not following that routine, when I'm not taking that quiet time just to be with the Lord, I see how I become more stressed out, or how my relationships, especially with my husband, you know, can suffer. So I would say that, you know, it's also important for us to take care of ourselves spiritually, to pray, to go to confession, and as much as we can, to encourage our spouses to do that with us. And I know we could probably do another Facebook Live or a podcast just on prayer, and we probably will do that at some point in the future, because I know that we aren't all in situations where our spouses are maybe on the same page with us in terms of spirituality or our faith. But I think that, you know, taking care of our souls is another really important aspect of how we care for ourselves and how we allow God to take care of us.
All right. Well, once again, we're so sorry about the glitch here with the Facebook Live event, but we encourage you, when you view this, to please, we'll have some discussion questions on Facebook in our group. So please comment and tell us what you think, what strategies that you've learned work best for you for self-care. And let's keep the conversation going. So thank you so much for joining us for this podcast episode Please like, subscribe, like, and rate our podcast if you listen to it on Apple Podcasts, right? That's where they can, I think, give us
Great review.
yeah, give us a review, and that will help other people to find the podcast. And then stay tuned on our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram for other episodes and happenings coming soon.
And no more technical difficulties.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye. I'm going to just stop the recording.